Thanks, Priya, and so good to see you and to welcome you on the conversation on big cats. I was super fascinated when I read that you had worked on the clouded leopard. So I wanted to connect and get you to talk a little bit about it. Just to introduce you, you're an independent wildlife researcher who's been working in India now for about 10 years and is fascinated by all forms of life and has focused on carnivores because they really, really intrigue you. In 2008, as a part of your master's dissertation, you've studied the human and ecological parameters on striped hyena in northwest India. Hyenas are animals that we actually don't see very much, so that's a really great talk, and maybe we'll touch upon it a little bit. Much of your work is directed towards exploring the diverse mammalian community in northeast India and its guild of forest-dependent felids, including the clouded leopard. You've also been involved in assessing the potential for cheetah reintroduction in India. And just to tell you, we've had some wonderful sessions discussing just that. We had Dr. Ranjit Singh and Dr. Divyabhan Chavra and of course Dr. Jhala from the Wildlife Institute, and in talks with Elena, who is the head researcher at the Marameru Cheetah Project. And we've just completed all of that. So I'd love to hear what you did on that, just again, when we talk at the end. You've also been the senior researcher on the Wild Cat series on National Geographic, which is fascinating, and the Wild Canid-India Project. So just absolutely fascinating. I'm so delighted to have you here. Welcome again, and tell us a little bit about your work and take us through your work on clouded leopards, please.
Thank you for that introduction, Latika. So, well, yes, I've done all of what you said, and I think you missed out on one of the topics that I worked on, which was looking at the historical distribution of tigers in Rajasthan. And I think that was one of the more interesting studies that I did, because it was unlike most other studies I do. This involved a lot of interviews. It involved actually pulling out information from archives and putting it together and looking at what we lost in a period of about 70 to 80 years. This incredible diversity, not just diversity, but diversity of species, because the study doesn't just focus on tigers, it also talks about black buck and many other species, and how they were found across a large part of Rajasthan. And then with changes in policies and changes in the way we used our land, how these species just vanished in such short period, to think of it. Within many people's lifetimes, like many people I interviewed saw this whole process. So we are talking about a single generation of human life seeing and observing this. So having said that, I have moved my attention lately to Northeast India, where I'm hoping to make sure that this process that we saw in Northwest India and elsewhere, perhaps in India, does not repeat itself, and that we can prevent massive landscape changes of the nature that happened elsewhere in India from happening in Northeast India. And one of the species that I have been focusing on is the clouded leopard. So this picture that you see, remember that this is one of the finest pictures that you'll ever see of the clouded leopard in the wild. Rest of the presentation perhaps will not have pictures of this quality. You'll have to satisfy yourself with pictures taken by regular camera traps, which we researchers use. So I've spent considerable amount of time now. I was just thinking about it, about 6 years now, looking for clouded leopards and trying to study them and study associated wildlife and other co-predators, and what are the challenges that these species face, and how can we prevent these challenges from disturbing or destroying these species forever. So here is a clouded leopard. This is a clouded leopard from mainland continental Asia. As many of you perhaps are aware, and perhaps you are aware, that the clouded leopard in 2006 was formally split into two species. So now we have the clouded leopard, which is Neofelis nebulosa, and then we have the Sunda clouded leopard, which is the Riadi. And the Sunda clouded leopard is restricted to Borneo and Sumatra, so I'm not going to be talking about that. I'll focus the attention of this presentation on Neofelis nebulosa, which is the clouded leopard that is found all the way from Nepal, northeast India, Bangladesh, and goes up all the way to Laos and Cambodia. So this is roughly the distribution of clouded leopards. To be honest, we really don't know where else they may be found, but we think at least it's found in these areas. One interesting question about clouded leopards is, are they big cats or small cats? I understand this presentation is largely about big cats. So how is it? What is this cat? Well, I like to say it's the biggest of the small cats and the smallest of the big cats. And one of the interesting things about clouded leopards is that they are a medium-sized cat. They don't roar like a big cat, but they don't exactly purr like a small cat either. And these cats spend a lot of their time up in trees, or at least they are capable of spending a lot of their time up in trees. Their morphology is so well suited for a cat that can spend time in trees. They have long, thick tails, which allow them to balance themselves. They have these short paws, broad paws, which again allow them to balance well on trees. They have very well-defined binocular vision, so they can judge distance as well. And unlike any other felid, they can actually come down from a tree with their head down first, like squirrels. Also, they have these very long canines, the longest canines in proportion to their skull size for any felid, and hence they're often compared to a modern-day saber-tooth, or they're often called the modern-day saber-tooth cats. These are amongst the oldest cats that we know of, because within the Pantherina lineage, these were the first cats to have diverged. So they are very old. And because of their long canines, they do predate a lot on ungulates, primates. They're capable of killing primates up in canopy. They predate upon ungulates. They also predate upon domestic livestock. So we are talking about goats, dogs. In fact, Mizoram, where I work, in Lusai language, they have a very interesting term for clouded leopards. The word for clouded leopard there is Kelral, and some people call it Zongral. Kelral literally translates to the goat-eating tiger, and Zongral literally translates to the monkey-eating tiger. So, and I think that's such a perfect name for this species. Actually, that's what it should be called. So clouded leopards also live with a diversity of other incredible species, especially when we talk in the context of India. These are species that most people rarely get to see across the Indian mainland. So we are talking about Malayan sun bear, golden cats, marble cats, most of which you'll never see elsewhere in India. Cover an incredible range of habitats. Now you see these three pictures here, and the reason I've put them is because all three are from locations where in some sense I was looking for a clouded leopard or hoping for a clouded leopard, and they're found in all three of these locations. If you see, it's a combination of mountains, dense forest, and water. And which also means if you're looking for clouded leopards, you have to navigate this terrain and all the obstacles that come with the terrain. My search for the clouded leopard actually began accidentally. In 2011, I was doing a survey with several other colleagues in Nagaland. We were in this remote village along Indo-Myanmar border, and we came across the skin, which I'm holding here. It was so fresh, it was still moist. It had maggots coming out of it. And the hunter who shot it said he shot it not because he was actively looking to shoot something, but he was just walking to his field and he saw this cat, and it was no hunting season, which is something the community decides there. And he said because he wasn't actively looking for something, it didn't matter whether it was no hunting season or not. He had his gun with him. He shot this cat. At that point, I wasn't even sure if this was a clouded leopard because my knowledge of clouded leopards was so limited. So I looked at the skin and we thought it was a clouded leopard. Of course, now I'm sure it is a clouded leopard. This was followed by a study that I was doing with a colleague in Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary in Arunachal Pradesh. And we had several camera traps out for this study, and we heard of somebody's goat having been killed by a predator, an unknown predator. We put a camera trap out, and next day we got a picture of just 2 ears and a little bit of a head. I wasn't sure what this cat was. I thought it was a clouded leopard, but we couldn't be certain based on that picture. Of course, today, after having gone through thousands of clouded leopard camera trap images, I'm certain that that was a clouded leopard. So that was the second clouded leopard that I came across or got very close to seeing. And this was followed by watching a documentary which came out around the same time called The Return of the Clouded Leopard, which traces the story of these 2 cubs that were picked up from a market in Assam, and the forest department confiscated them and gave them to WTI, who then raised them in captivity and finally released them out in the forest, in the wild. And I thought that was a very fascinating description of this cat. And that's the first time I actually spent so much time watching this cat. And of course, I was hooked in many ways to this beautiful creature. But I wasn't sure if I was ever going to study a species like this, especially given that science requires data. And data on clouded leopards is something that you would never really get in enough quantity to be able to do good science, which means, good statistics and come up with conclusions and evidence. So just around this time, I was offered a position in a project which was going to look at clouded leopard ecology across their range, which means looking at clouded leopards all the way from Nepal to Laos and Borneo and Sumatra. And I thought this was a project that I couldn't say a no to. Besides, it was a project that was Professor David McDonald's dream project. And yes, without giving it any thought, I said, yes, I'll do it. But I wasn't sure where I was going to find clouded leopards in those numbers in India to be able to do good science. So started my search for a field site. And luckily, this was the 2 organizations that were actually handling this project, Ecosystem India and Wild Crew. Both had very flexible people. My advisors were very flexible. They were incredible people to work with, because they gave me the option of choosing a site that I felt comfortable in. And the only site I would feel comfortable in was a site which would give me adequate amount of information on this cat. So we did a short survey in Pakke. And although Pakke, there is adequate evidence of clouded leopards, and I could have done the study there, I chose to do it in Mizoram, in Dampa Tiger Reserve, where also I did a survey. And the reason I chose Dampa over Pakke was only because there were already a lot of researchers working in Pakke, and there was nobody working in Dampa, primarily because the terrain in Dampa is very hard to access and the logistics were difficult. And so I thought of working in Dampa, but if you look at this map, roughly this describes what Northeast India is for those who don't know what it looks like. And the red dot there is what I'm going to focus rest of my presentation on. This man here that you see, Putlana, most of you would find it near impossible to pronounce his name, and so did I. So Putlana is the person who introduced me to Dampa. He is one of those rare forest officers I've met, because he is the only forest officer who actually walked with me into Dampa. We walked about 12 kilometers. He showed me what his park, in his words, was all about. So as the field director of Dampa, he introduced me to Dampa, and he was not easy to deal with. He was a strict person. He looked at me and he said, if you want to work here, you have to walk like this. There are no roads here. You carry everything on your back. and you have to be loyal to this place. Well, I have been loyal to this place ever since, because since it had a field director like this, I just thought that this place was worth protecting and worth being in. So Tampa became the site where I was to conduct my first independent study on clouded leopards. And I had very simple research goals. The goals were to estimate populations of clouded leopards, which was a bit idealistic. And the second one was to look at how different co-predators or different felids, how do they coexist in this landscape? At that point, I didn't even know if I was going to get adequate pictures of other felids. I didn't even know what other felids were found here. And I'd hypothesized that similar sized felids would either have spatial avoidance or they would have temporal avoidance, because they would not want to be with one another. And of course, as one moved towards the edges of the protected area, the density of the felids would decrease. I used a tool which is now commonly used to estimate populations of carnivores, which is camera traps. And so I had 160 camera traps, which is about 80 pairs, and they were placed across an area of about 85 square kilometers. So let's say roughly one pair of camera traps every square kilometer. And I had them out for about 75 days on an average each camera. These cameras are motion triggered, and as an animal walks past, the cameras fire and you get both flanks of the individual. And that's how you can actually create histories of which individual came at which camera trap location. And if you see, sometimes you get these obliging individuals like this one. I called him CL025 because that was his code. And you can see how perfectly he came and kept moving in front of my camera in exactly the same way. And so it was possible to identify him and similarly many other individuals. We had, the numbers are all given out here. So you can see we had about 84 independent clouded leopard photo captures, which is where independent photo capture means you have a photo taken by both sides of the camera or by both cameras, or a photo taken by one camera. So if both cameras fire at the same time, that photo is not counted as, those are not two photographs, it's one photograph. So actually I had about 160 plus photo captures, but they were condensed into 84 photo captures and for clouded leopards. And I did the same for marble cats, because interestingly, we had some good data on marble cats as well. And this came down to condensed into 10 individuals. And a lot of photos are usually blurry. You saw the quality of photos I was getting. And camera traps that we use for research purpose are not as expensive as professional camera traps that photographers use. So these don't produce great quality pictures. And sometimes when the individual moves fast, you may get a blurry picture. Or if an individual doesn't come at the right angle, you may not get a picture which you can use. So you really need the animals to cooperate and the cameras to cooperate simultaneously. Many times it doesn't happen. So you end up with fewer pictures than what your cameras may have taken. And we used some sophisticated statistical tools and software and estimated populations of both clouded leopards and marble cats. We used a Bayesian method to estimate populations, and we also used a maximum likelihood based approach. These generated density estimates. They also generated estimates of numbers of individuals, and we got a sigma. Sigma is basically, it can be roughly translated to the amount of distance moved by an individual per day, and this is in meters. So roughly these densities were, the estimates of densities for clouded leopards were about 4.14, and that for marble cat was 5.03. Now these may seem really low, but the truth is that these are amongst the highest we have recorded from anywhere in the world. So yes, these are about 5 per, the estimates are about 5 per 100 square kilometers for both clouded leopard and marble cat. We also got information on the other three felids found in that area, which is marble cat, golden cat, and leopard cat. Marble cat and golden cat are hard to find in most forests of Northeast India also. So this is interesting data. And what we found then was really interesting, because we looked at how do these cats temporally, how they separate themselves out, or do they have an overlap in their activity. And what we found was that marble cat and leopard cat showed complete avoidance in terms of time. So while marble cats were almost entirely diurnal, leopard cats were almost entirely nocturnal, which is something you'd expect in similar sized felids because they are separating themselves out in terms of time. And for golden cat and clouded leopard, which are also kind of similar size, the pattern of separation in terms of time was not as striking. And the reason for this is perhaps because they were spatially separating themselves out. But if you want to know more about that, I suggest you read the paper, which I've cited below, and you'll get more information on that. So having said this, the next thing is, now, given that we are focusing on Dampa at this point, and the problems that Dampa faces, or that landscape in general faces, those problems are not just limited to Dampa, but they are kind of similar across Northeast India and across regions which are home to clouded leopards. So we are talking about, Meghalaya, we are talking about parts of Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, and these are the general problems: hunting of direct persecution of clouded leopards, persecution of prey, basically hunting of prey for meat, traps. Traps are, I consider traps worse than anything else when it comes to animals in the forest. The reason being, many times these traps are just left out and people don't even go to check them again. And sometimes they end up finding species that they weren't even expecting in those traps. So here you can see my field assistant, Laltan Puya. He's one person who's taught me more about that landscape than anybody else I know. He's sitting here and showing me a snare. This is the first time I'd walked into Dampa and he showed me what a snare looked like. You see coal mining. In fact, that's an area where somebody told me to go look for clouded leopards because they said there are clouded leopards in that landscape. When I went, this is what I saw. And that picture you see on the side, on the right side at the bottom, it may look like mist rising from hills in the morning, but it's actually jhum fires. And while jhum by itself may not be so detrimental to wildlife in these areas, the fact that a lot of these areas are by now being cleared, and now you have plantations, you have monoculture plantations of oil palm or areca replacing natural vegetation, that is damaging to clouded leopards and all other biodiversity. So what is the road ahead for this cat? Well, the interesting thing here is that Southeast Asia and Northeast India, that entire landscape or that entire region of Asia, which supports clouded leopards, is also one of those areas which is under massive challenges in terms of deforestation. It has higher rate of deforestation than many other parts of the world. And in fact, one of the highest rates of deforestation is right here. And these are areas that also have high hunting pressure and monocultures coming in. And these are areas that also support the clouded leopard. Now, very often in India itself, we believe that tigers are what signify how rich that forest is or how well protected that forest is. The truth is that tigers are being introduced, or there are proposals being prepared to reintroduce tigers or to introduce tigers into areas where today there are no tigers in Northeast India, but there are clouded leopards. And how the presence of tigers is going to interfere with the clouded leopard, we really don't know. But in many ways, I believe that I could get the kind of data I got in Dampa only because clouded leopards were highly terrestrial there in the absence of a bigger predator. And we have actually this unique community of felids in Dampa, which comprises of clouded leopards, marble cats, and golden cats, which you don't find anywhere else in India. So instead of protecting and preserving this unique diversity of life, we want to bring in tiger because we believe the presence of tiger is the only way we can judge the protection levels of an area. This is something that we really need to think about because clouded leopards are truly the tigers of treetops. These are cats that are capable of hunting in the canopy, high up in the canopy, which is indicative of the fact that these cats can survive in tropical forests, the kind that are found in Northeast India. So they can hunt up in canopy, they can feed on barking deer down below in the understory. These cats have an incredible ability to hide from hunters, given the kind of hunting that happens in many of these areas. I can't believe that clouded leopards still survive. And one of the reasons perhaps is because these cats spend so much of their time just moving from branches to branches instead of even coming down on ground. Also, they are just well adapted to that habitat and those landscapes. So I feel there has to be more attention given to the clouded leopard, and especially at this point when the world is going through this economic recession, or it's headed towards an economic recession because of COVID-19. What this will mean for a species like the clouded leopard is something we need to give some thought to. We need to think about iconic flagship species like the clouded leopard, which truly represent the predators of tropical forests, the kind that exists in Northeast India. So, having said that, I'm hoping that some policymakers somewhere will hear this presentation and will think about this and consider the importance of this species, which is found across Northeast India, or at least we hope it is. And I just want to make sure that we have the slide up, which is all these organizations and people have been with me through this journey of 4 years where I've tried studying clouded leopards, and I want to thank all of them.
Super. Okay, so we have the study that I was talking about by Sahil and in Dibang, and there we have tigers with clouded leopards and a lot of golden cat also, from what I could see. How does the data from there compare with the data from the area that you studied?
So Sahil's work is unique, and it's also unique because of the community he's working with there. So it seems the Idu Mishmis make an effort to protect tigers, and they do not hunt tigers because it's a taboo. Whereas the landscapes that I'm talking about may not have had those taboos, and hence we are talking about something, a natural phenomena or a cultural phenomena which may have already impacted populations of, say, species like tigers there. So now we have a situation where tigers are in very few numbers, or they almost don't exist. And we have this community of smaller cats, which are sort of replacing the tiger. So, for instance, I think the Dibang Valley, they don't have the kind of marble cat populations that we have in Dampa landscape. So there's always some species which is here, which is not there. Also, Dibang has the elevational gradient, which Dampa doesn't. Dampa ranges from about 150 meters, it goes up to about 1100 meters. So we don't know what other factors come into play when we talk about, the availability of prey, what prey can support what species, the hunting that has already gone in and species that have already been brought to extinction. The idea is to bring in a new predator. How these cats and this community of cats, how is it going to respond to the presence of a tiger, needs to be thought about. And instead of spending the crores that we are going to spend on tigers, how about protecting the existing species with that kind of money?
Very important. Okay, we also have very little information on clouded leopards. So is anybody actually doing any, for instance, telemetric studies to see home ranges and dispersal and the use of corridor connectivities to move out? What do we know about all of this?
So that's a very, very good question and a very relevant question. Data from this study that I conducted in Dampa was pooled in along with data from studies from across Southeast Asia. So there were teams from Wild Crew working in all parts of Southeast Asia, practically every country which has clouded leopards, and all of this data was pooled in together. And actually that paper was published a couple of years ago. And it talks about what are the variables that actually influence the distribution of clouded leopards. And an interesting finding from that study was that closed canopy forests are the most important determinants of clouded leopard presence. So for species like clouded leopards, it's hard to do standalone studies because you may not get adequate data to actually come up with reliable inferences. So here we do need to pool in our data, or we do need to conduct studies across large landscapes. And so Wild Crew did a great job with it because we have an increased understanding of clouded leopards across their distribution. And now already Dr. Andrew Hearn has started a telemetry study with the Bornean population. So he's working with the Sunda clouded leopards in Borneo, where he has them collared. And I think data has just started trickling in. Give it another 2 to 3 years, and I'm very hopeful we'll know a lot more about clouded leopards. But again, I don't know how the economic recession is going to impact some of these ongoing studies, because many of these studies are not supported by governments. They're supported by they're supported by philanthropists or by donors. And I don't know how COVID is going to impact the ability of donors to give this kind of money.
Yeah. That's been something that's been a recurring theme, and we've been talking about this. The other very important thing that I was discussing with another colleague of mine, who's I don't know, you must have come across him, Christy Williams. Do you know Christy? Yes. So Christy and I did our doctorates together, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about how there is a tendency for scientists to stay within a community, and all of this really important information never actually gets out to stakeholders who are the true guardians of the cats. So is there anything that you do to actually give that information back to people in the Northeast that could influence policy, that could influence decision making? Have you ever done any presentations like that or shared information?
I would say I have been making an effort that my research goes out to public as much as possible, specifically public in Northeast India and in Mizoram particularly, because that's where I work. So there are a few journalists who have been picking up our work, and they have been publishing it in Mizo newspapers. And I personally believe that because of that, information on clouded leopards has improved considerably, because about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, there was a case where a clouded leopard had gone into somebody's chicken coop and had killed several number of chicken over a period of time. And then somebody from the forest department called me to inform me of this, and they asked what they should be doing. I had suggestions, but of course they were not implemented. And the clouded leopard was picked up from there, brought to the zoo, and then from the zoo it was brought to Dampa and released there, because they believe Dampa is the safest place for clouded leopards now. So what I was saying was that, so the forest department also does communicate whatever is happening with clouded leopards. Usually they will inform me of whatever is happening. But and at a local level also, people are starting to realize that there are clouded leopards in their area, and that these cats, in some sense, they are representative of the forest that they live in. However, having said this, I believe that the kind of attention and the kind of publicity that we should be giving out is not happening. I did try having, I've been trying to push forth this idea of having these football tournaments in the area where I work. And the reason for the football tournaments was mainly that I wanted to engage the younger kids and the boys primarily into doing something other than hunting, because otherwise they're out with their slingshots and catapults hunting birds. So I wanted to pull them away from that. And the only thing that I thought or that I felt was going to draw them more than catapults and hunting was football. So I started getting them to play football games, and we would use one species of carnivore or any other wild species as their team mascot. So I would give clouded leopard as a mascot to one team, and tiger to another, and so on and so forth. And yes, it's interesting how they look at it. I mean, of course, they think it's really funny, but some of them have now started accepting it as part of their game ritual. And I'm hoping that, if we continue doing this for some more years, they will realize, and they will probably provide the same kind of protection that a football team mascot deserves to these species in the wild as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so you brought up a very important issue, which I don't think we've discussed today, which is human-wildlife conflict. More importantly, clouded leopard and humans. Do clouded leopards adapt to living around human habitations easily?
I don't have an answer to that question. We've had few cases where people have reported clouded leopards coming and attacking their chicken coops. And sometimes, occasionally, somebody's dog gets picked up. But it's not something that I hear of often, because even if you look at a protected area like Dampa, animals prefer not going to the edges. They prefer not going into villages. They prefer avoiding humans.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of prey within Dampa, within the protected area, the core zone of Dampa. It has 5 species of ungulates. It has gaur, which is I think unheard of in Northeast India. It has gaur, it has sero, barking deer, sambar, wild pig. So it has, I mean, not that clouded leopards are going to predate upon gaur, but still it has a vast diversity of, it has galliforms, it has, you have peacock pheasants, you have jungle fowl, caliche pheasant. So there is a lot of food for clouded leopards within the forest. So it's unlikely that an individual is going to come out. But the incident that occurred north of Aizawl, about 60 kilometers north of Aizawl, and I suspect there will be areas where there will be deforestation and complete changes at a landscape level, and clouded leopards may run short of prey, and they may come into human areas and perhaps predate on livestock.
So, we've talked of the clouded leopard living with its smaller cousins, and we've talked of the clouded leopard living with the tiger. But the one animal we haven't mentioned yet is the leopard. Does the leopard and clouded leopard, do they use the same areas? Do you find leopards there? Do you know anything about their relationship?
So I am a bad person to ask this question, or I am the wrong person to ask this question. The reason being, during the camera trapping that I did in Dampa, which was in 2014-15, then again in 2017, and then again in 2019, I have never got a leopard on a camera trap. In fact, the last photographic evidence of a leopard that we've got from Dampa is from, I think, 2011 or 12. And in 2019, I did come across maybe 1 or 2 scats, which I think are leopard scats. But we are still awaiting results from the lab, DNA results. So we are waiting for the molecular results, and only then will we be able to confirm if those are leopard samples. But the fact is that even if there are leopards in Dampa, they are in such few numbers that they wouldn't really interfere with clouded leopards in an ecological sense. Mm-hmm. But in Manas, there was a study conducted which looked at both clouded leopard populations and leopard populations, and they had very high clouded leopard populations. By very high, I mean on a relative scale, on a global relative scale. Their clouded leopard populations were almost the same as those found in Dampa, or those estimated from Dampa. So Manas has both. It has clouded leopards and leopards, and at that point, tiger numbers were very, very low. They were almost insignificant. But now I think tiger numbers have gone up in Manas, and I think that's why Manas makes for a great ecological laboratory to answer some of the questions you're asking. What happens when the bigger predator numbers go up? What happens to clouded leopards?
So are there still any ongoing studies in Manas?
Yes, I think I think the Wildlife Institute of India has a study going on there, and I think Aranyak may have a study. I'm not sure, but they may. These are organizations that work there.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think this has just been absolutely incredible. We could carry on cats in the Northeast forever, but coming back, rewinding, I was going to talk about your tiger project now and understand what you had done. So I'm sitting actually in Udaipur, and this is in Rajasthan. So the study absolutely fascinates me, because though there's been a lot of hue and cry about how we've lost most of our tigers in the last century and a bit, nobody's ever done a study like you have. So can you tell us a little bit about what made you do the study, and maybe a little bit about some of the incidents where you went and you actually found out, where tigers were and what happens there today, what exists in those places today?
So the reason I did the study was because we had somebody ready to fund the study, which is the most important thing for us researchers most of the time. It's not what we are passionate about or what we want to do. It's usually what we find funds to do. So yes, WWF and Mr. Ravi Singh were very keen on supporting the study, and Dr. G.V. Reddy, who's right now the POF for Rajasthan, and at that point he was the Chief Wildlife Warden. He was very keen on the study being conducted. He's somebody who I really respect and look up to. He's one of those rare forest officers that who you just can't not respect. So he asked me to do the study, and because he was keen on seeing what results we'd get, and I agreed to do it because I don't say no to him for most things. So and yes, then it meant sort of figuring out what I wanted to ask and how we could collect this data in a systematic fashion, because otherwise, if you go talking to people casually about where tigers were or how many tigers, your ancestors may have shot, the numbers can, sometimes they're very vague and sometimes they're unbelievable and unrealistic. So the idea was to collect information from multiple sources and then cross-check and confirm the figures in some way. Which was a bit challenging, but luckily we have the State Archives in Bikaner, and it has these documents which were submitted by the princely states at the time of independence. So I could access those documents, and also I found a very supportive person at the State Archives, Mr. Mahendra Singh, who was more than happy to give me access to these documents. So basically I think everything came together so well. I found people who opened up their homes and gave me access to libraries. There were people who were willing to be interviewed and give information. And then we had the State Archives and we had the Forest Department information, whatever information they had. So all of this information was put together, and we managed to get the study. We managed to produce this study. But what was really interesting was looking at records of tigers from the Kota, Bundi, Udaipur, Chittorgarh landscape. There were records of tigers from practically that entire area, that entire region. And today when you go there, there's not a single tiger left. So the big question was, what happened to tigers here? And of course, I would urge people, or I would suggest that they read this report to see what happened, because there is no straight answer for this. A lot of political decisions and a lot of policy-related decisions are greatly responsible for tigers disappearing, but also in some sense, the kind of protective attitude of a lot of ruling elites who didn't want to give up these animals, who didn't want to part with these animals, is also responsible to some extent. So one is that. But since you asked me to name some places, or at least one place where there were tigers at one point, and today, there may not be any tigers. Two places that come to mind when I talk about that are, one is a painting that I saw. It's a mural in Bundi Fort of obviously a king, because this figure is sitting in an odi, and he's firing at a tiger, or at least he may not be firing, but he has his gun in his hand, and he's looking at there's a tiger drinking water at this water hole. Now this water hole exists today, and I happened to go to that water hole before I went to the fort and saw this mural. The water hole is probably a tourist destination. I'm guessing it's a tourist destination by the way it looked. I don't know what real purpose it serves, but I think it's a tourist destination, and it was full of garbage. There was garbage all around. There was no water in the water hole, and the building was collapsing. And this is very close to Bundi town. So this was one of those places. And another place where there were tigers, and actually there were tigers, then they went extinct, then they were reintroduced in the 1920s, which is epic, because today we spend millions and millions of rupees in bringing tigers into an area. This was done in 1920s by a princely state, Dungarpur. So I went and saw the forest where the tigers were. And I couldn't believe that there were tigers roaming wild in that forest, because it's so close to Dungarpur town. Dungarpur town is almost encroaching into this piece of forest today. So those two places really stood out.
Fantastic. Okay, now going back one more step, your work in hyenas. In India especially, they're eyed with a lot of suspicion. They're not the most popular animals, that you can find. I've had many an occasion where I've sat and watched hyenas at their dens, hyenas with their babies. They have an incredible social system. And then I was very fortunate because I was in Ethiopia. And there's this whole amazing way that they view hyenas. And I don't know if you've seen this photograph of mine. Yeah, where I met the hyena people of Harar, and actually spent a few days with them. So how did you start on hyenas, and tell us a little bit about your work and something about these incredible animals, because they're so shy and elusive in India.
So the hyena story is unlike any other, I think, that I have. So when I joined my master's program, I was determined that I would study hyenas for my master's dissertation, something I would never advise any master's student to do. Never beforehand decide what you're going to study, and never be so obstinate about what you're going to do. Today I realize the importance of having the right kind of data, being able to use the right statistical tools and publish the right way, not just go because you want to study something, and especially don't pick up a large carnivore for a master's dissertation. But the reason I wanted to study hyenas was because I was fascinated by a story I'd heard in my house several times. And the story was about my great-grandfather. So he had a jagir, and which is basically an area from where you can collect revenue. And this is a village far north of Jodhpur district. So it's 90 kilometers from Jodhpur, along Jodhpur-Nagaur border. And in this place, my great-grandfather had a rule for his son, which is my grandfather. And the rule was that you can hunt whatever you wish to, but not hyenas. And which was kind of funny, because everybody used to laugh at my great-grandfather and say, why this? And he'd say, because that's my municipal corporation. They keep my village clean. So, and I used to keep hearing this story until I realized that there are no hyenas in this village and anywhere close to it. There's no evidence of hyenas. So that's when I got to know that. So I asked somebody where the hyenas went, and I was told that, they used to stay in these rocks. There were these crevices in these rocks, and these were like large, kind of biggish crevices. So the animals, like there were like gaps in this rock that we have there. And so in this rocky area in between sand dunes, these hyenas used to go and den there during the day. And the temperature there used to be much lower during the day. So they would go and sort of seek refuge there. And with time, people started mining. They started quarrying that stone for building homes. And the hyenas lost their home in turn, and hence they disappeared. Nobody knows where they went today. So, of course, this is a story of local extinction happening, right where I come from. Having heard this story, I wanted to know where else hyenas are and where they could, and what is happening with them. And everybody disliked hyenas so much in my family and around my family. By dislike, I mean they just looked down upon them so much that I decided that I would study them. And hence I went on to pick it up as a dissertation topic. And my advisor, Dr. Ulas Karanth, he was extremely supportive of it, which was strange because I was going to suggest something to him on the lines of studying some rodents or something in Rajasthan. But he had heard of the hyena story and he asked me if I wanted to study hyenas, and I said yes. And he said, sure, go ahead, I'll support you with it. So that's how I ended up studying hyenas. And of course, it was an incredible experience because I realized how intelligent these animals are, how they'd escape my camera traps. They just didn't want to come before a camera, and how hyenas don't just scavenge, they also eat a lot of other things, including they go crop raiding, is what I figured during this period. So yes, I thought they were fascinating, and of course people around did not approve of me studying them. And local people also continued to, they had a lot of stories about them. They'd say hyenas are horses of witches. So basically, witches eat the soul of the dead animal, and hyenas eat the flesh. So this is like a saying that goes on. It's sort of highly prevalent in that landscape and in that region. But yes, I had a fascinating time watching them and just trying to get them on the cameras and estimating their numbers.
Fantastic. I'm so glad we got to talk. I mean, I could just listen to your stories forever and swap tales. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be in touch. And I hope someday we can go and do that camera trapping study in the Northeast we had discussed.
Yes.
Lovely. Thanks.
Lovely talking to you as well, Latika. Bye.
Bye.
So I have this presentation called Puma Mode, and everyone asks me why it's called Puma Mode.